Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and let me know if you like being a little further away from me. Since I got my mic, I can sit as far away as we like. So let me know what you think of the new angle. I wish you could see more of these upper shelves, but now you get to see a little bit of a sneak peek down here, which is kind of cool. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I have several videos on my channel talking about short books. Books to read quickly to help you achieve your reading goals. But when I was a kid, I absolutely went to the library and picked books based on size. And the bigger the book, the more likely I was to try and read it. Because typically that meant epic fantasy worlds that I could really dive into. I don't pick my books like that anymore. As I've grown into my adulthood, I don't necessarily reach for long books for the sake of their length, but I think there are a lot of long books out there that need more love, and don't be too intimidated by them, in my opinion. In today's video, I'm going to be recommending 6 books that I think are worth your time that are over 500 pages. I have books from all sorts of genres in here today, so hopefully you will find a recommendation that meets your reading genre preferences. I also want to say I was inspired to do this video by the creator Elliot Brooks, so if you have not checked out her channel, why are you watching me and not Elliot Brooks? She's much bigger and does lots of stuff on her channel that I highly recommend, and I will link her video where she is recommending large books in the description down below. The first book I'm going to talk about is actually a literary classic, and it is my favorite classic. I'm actually slowly making my way through a reread of this book to highlight my favorite quotes, and that is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This cover is stunning. I love this edition. It's nice and floppy as well. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is sort of a gothic literary fiction adjacent. It's not completely gothic, but this is about the primary narrator is a man, and a woman and her son move into the crumbling manor next door, and half of this manor is falling down, hence the gothic vibes. You know, they only use a couple rooms in the manor that are still livable, and it's about this man getting to know this woman and her child and kind of uncovering what brought her there. About a quarter of the way through the book, the woman hands our narrator her journal, and the majority of the book is actually reading from her perspective how she got to where she is today. So we have a little bit of a framing narrative as well as the journal entries following this woman's life. I adored this. I read this very, very quickly in what felt like 1 or 2 sittings. It flew by, and the thing that I enjoy about this classic in particular is it's not very flowery. I think Anne Bronte is one of the more straightforwardly written writers that I've read. As I'm doing my reread and highlighting quotes, the language is much simpler, in my opinion, than other authors. So I think this is one of the most approachable classics, one of the most underrated classics, and a really interesting novel that was very much so ahead of its time, dealing with themes of abuse, misogyny, parenthood, love, and all sorts of good stuff in here. So I highly recommend The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. My copy is, I think, 576 pages. The next book on my list is actually a contemporary romance, completely shifting gears, and that is On the Same Page by Haley Cass. I do not own this book physically, so here's the book, here's the cover. And this is a sapphic contemporary romance told in 2 timelines and 2 perspectives. So we have Gianna and we have Riley, and they have been best friends for a long, long time, and over a very silly misunderstanding, they start to develop feelings for each other or uncover feelings that have been there all along. In the past timeline, we are in Gianna's perspective, and it's when they are in college, meeting for the first time and developing the friendship. And then Riley's perspective is in the present timeline, kind of unfolding their current romance. The reason I like this book so much is that it is a slow build. I don't typically like friends to lovers, but there was enough development, in my personal opinion, to understand why these two were friends and why these two were perfect for each other as a romantic pairing. We have enough time to develop that friendship as well as the romantic relationship in this one, because it is 504 pages. I had to check my notes really quick. Another thing I like about this book is that Riley and Gianna start off on the wrong foot. They have a pretty big misunderstanding. They do not like each other in the beginning of their friendship. It wasn't a friendship in the beginning. They were roommates. And slowly we get to see them go from misunderstood, bad first impressions to friends, and then best of friends to lovers. I'm not one to really enjoy long contemporary romances. I like a really snappy rom-com, but this one I think is definitely worth the read and the page count. If you're more of a romantasy girly, I recommend A Taste of Golden Iron, which is a gay fantasy romance. And this is 503 pages. This is about a prince named Cadeau and his bodyguard, and I love a good bodyguard romance. The plot of this book, outside of the romance, is that Cadeau is tasked with uncovering a plot where there seems to be counterfeit currency floating around in the markets in his city, and his sister, who is the Empress, is tasked her brother to solve this, because of course fake currency in the market destabilizes the economy and drives prices up. And, you know, we don't want a revolt or anything like that. This is another instance of two characters who don't understand each other, don't like each other at the beginning, and slowly starts to develop a romance over time. With a longer page count, you get that time. You get to watch a more organic, what seems to be a more organic unfolding of enemies is not quite the right word, but two people who don't really understand each other, who don't really like each other, slowly developing a friendship that slowly develops into feelings, and then eventually ends up into a romance. And I think that is the benefit of having a longer page count for a romance novel in general. I also think the fantasy in this is pretty fun. They, like magic users, can taste metals and then divine things about the metals and where they came from, hence the discovery of the currency issue. So I think this is a fun world building. I think the fantasy plot outside of the romance is kind of a fun adventure mystery. I like the culture explored here. It's an interesting, possibly Middle Eastern empire-inspired world, which I quite enjoyed, and the romance is the best part, in my opinion. So if you haven't read A Taste of Golden Iron, I highly recommend it. If you're not a romance fan, but you do like fantasy, I implore you to read Emma Wang, and in this video I'm talking about The Sword of Kaigen. I know Blood Over Bright Haven is kind of the newest work by this author, getting a lot of praise and buzz, and rightfully so, but I wanted to highlight this author's independently published standalone fantasy for this video, and my copy is 651 pages. This book follows two characters, a mother and a son, and Misaki is the mother. She used to be a warrior, an academic. She went to university, but ends up marrying a very traditional man and kind of putting her sword away and kind of burying that part of herself in motherhood, in homemaking, that sort of thing. And then we're also following Mamoru, who is her 14-year-old son, and he is starting to grow up. So there's a little bit of a coming of age element in this story, but he's also starting to realize that the world around him isn't exactly what he was always taught. We maybe have some propaganda that we're starting to deconstruct. Mamoru is really grappling with that. I also just really appreciate the loneliness that is depicted through Misaki's character and her experience of motherhood and what her current life has done to her as a person. So I just really appreciate this one for all that it does and everything it executes and explores. The plot of this book revolves around the place where these two characters live is on a very narrow peninsula connecting two countries, and the neighboring country is going to invade. And so this is a war story, trigger warning for all of that, where this little community is kind of the first line of defense against this incoming nation. So again, trigger warnings for all of that. What I enjoyed about this is really both of the characters and their very different arcs are masterfully done in here. The magic system is very similar to like Avatar the Last Airbender with like elemental magic. We get great fight scenes in here and action, and this is a devastating read. I won't sugarcoat it. This is not a happy time, and if you're in for a epic, maybe tragic tale, I can't recommend this one enough. I am cheating ever so slightly. Technically, I'm recommending a whole trilogy, so it's not necessarily 6 recommendations, but I'm recommending the entire trilogy. And it'd be very easy for me to recommend Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson writes very long novels. I wanted to recommend a series that was Sanderson adjacent, that maybe doesn't have quite as much hype or love as current Brandon Sanderson, and that is the Lycanius trilogy by James Islington. James Islington is getting pretty big with his new series, The Will of the Many and the Strength of the Few, but I recently went back to his first trilogy, and I really enjoyed this. So the first book is 602 pages, the second is 745, and the third is 857. The reason I wanted to recommend this trilogy in particular, not just because of the page length, but because I feel like this series has a lot of mass appeal. And I don't mean that as like a bad thing, I mean that as a good thing. I feel this way a little bit about Sanderson, where I feel like Sanderson has, and this is going to sound demeaning, and I don't mean that in a bad way in any way. Sanderson to me is very palatable, and it feels to me that he has a very broad audience of people that he is writing to. And I kind of feel that way about the Lycanius trilogy. This feels like a lot of other familiar fantasy, if you're a fantasy fan, but it does its own thing, which makes it enjoyable. Tonally, I think this one really toes the line between young adult and adult, which is another reason why I think a large swath of readers would enjoy this, because we're following young characters at first that slowly age with the series, and the level of, the thematic elements kind of also toe the line between adult and young adult. We're following kind of a chosen one story where our main character has powers that no one else does, which seems very familiar, but how those powers manifest and how the plot of the novel unfolds feels new and interesting and fresh. This is a multi-perspective story, so every novel gets more perspectives, so the story keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the stakes are incredibly high. The plot of the first novel is that there is a wall in the north blocking off these demons, essentially, this bad magic from entering this area that has been in place for like 1,000 years, and it is degrading. Again, this is a kind of a familiar trope, a threat to the north that may be coming to destroy us, but how it all plays out is very unique and interesting, in my opinion. This also has a lot of different types of characters that we're following. We're following some morally gray characters, some morally black characters, some good guys, and I just definitely think this trilogy is worth the read. It does have quite a few ratings, but it is a little bit older, and I just read it for the first time myself recently. So if you're looking for more books like Sanderson, or you enjoyed James Islington and his current releases, I highly recommend going and checking out his earlier work. And last but not least is my sci-fi recommendation. There's a lot of great sci-fi that is over 500 pages, but my tried and true recommendation is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, this is a series, but I did not continue with the series. I thought this had a perfect conclusion, and I just want to leave it at that. But there are more books beyond this if you read this and want more. But this book on its own is 600 pages. And if you're familiar with my channel, this is one of my favorite books of all time. I use every opportunity I can to recommend this book to people. And this is also written a few years ago at this point, so it's time for a refresher on the Children of Time. So this is a dual perspective story. We are following some humans that are on a generation ship. They are fleeing Earth and looking for hospitable places in the universe to colonize, essentially. And we're following a main character who keeps waking up throughout the journey, and things go down. Our other perspective are a group of sentient spiders as they are developing over the millennia. So we are following a great swath of time with these spiders as they go from more of a simple civilization to a more advanced civilization. And the story is ultimately about what happens when these two peoples meet for the first time and what that looks like. I absolutely adored this. Having a large page count allows the author to take time to develop an entire civilization from scratch over millennia. I really enjoy the perspective of the spiders as well, because the spiders remember previous generations. The spiders are named after their predecessors. So, for example, one of the main spiders in here is named Portia. And so there's a Portia in every generation. It's a different Portia, a different physical spider, but she remembers all the previous Portias. And so that was just a really interesting storytelling device of us getting to connect with a character who isn't really the same being every chapter, if that makes sense. So she's the same, but she's different every time. Just a really interesting way to play with perspective, and a perspective that is not human or humanoid in any way. Watching the spiders evolve is super interesting, and how a race of sentient spiders could possibly become technologically advanced was fascinating. And again, you've got 600 pages to really develop. I'm not really talking about the human timeline because honestly, I don't remember necessarily what happens with the humans as much. Humans are going to do what humans are going to do on an isolated spaceship, as you can imagine. But the spiders are what stick in my mind and what keep me recommending this book to all of you and being annoying about it. I highly recommend Children of Time. Let me know if you have read beyond Children of Time. I would love to know what your thoughts are on the sequels to this. Are they worth reading? Maybe I should get over myself and check those out as well. Those were 6 book recommendations that I think are worth your time. Tomes that are worth your time. Let me know some long books that you really enjoy, and I would love to hear all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye!